Dr. Mercola says a carnivore diet is a calcium deficit. Dr. Lustig's Facebook post yesterday said that meat drives choline, drives TMAO, drives heart disease, high protein drives mTOR. That's cute. I haven't seen Dr. Lustig's Facebook post, so I don't know sort of what he's talking about there. But does it? I mean, first of all, why are we saying that choline is a bad thing? Choline is required for your brain. Now we're saying that's bad. Apparently, TMAO and all the other sorts of things. These are all, and mTOR, all these sorts of things. These are one part in a very complex, multi-billion piece puzzle and machine. And so when we're talking about just like one thing's clicking off here, it's really myopic and missing the forest for the trees when you just look at this one little thing and this is everything. There's nothing else that matters. It's just this one little molecule. And it's just like, so even if it does drive up TMAO, is that necessarily going to always cause heart disease in all contexts forever? Probably not. Same with mTOR, and also it's assuming a fact that's not in evidence. There's absolutely no hard evidence that any of that stuff is true. So it's and the flat out answer is no, of course it doesn't, because the heart disease rates in the Inuit when they're just eating meat, basically non-existent. Same with the Maasai when they're just eating high fat meat and in their traditional diet. Now that they've moved to more grains and more sugar and shit like that, yeah, that's going up. Yeah, absolutely. But when they were only eating meat, non-existent. There's that study. I might be able to find it and put it in the chat, but it was a study back in the late 2000s. Oh no, sorry, not the late 2000s, the late 1920s. I actually have it here. I'll put it up in the chat. In the late 1920s, put it in the chat now for people who want to check it out. Late 1920s that found. They looked at the Maasai, looked at the Akikuyu, and the Akikuyu were largely plant-based, whole food, plant-based, growing it themselves, no pesticides, no pollution, anything like that. It's just this perfect idyllic situation. They were very sick. They got much more sick than the Maasai. And the Maasai barely got sick at all. They never really got sick. The males certainly were the most healthy out of all of them. Both males and females from the Maasai and Akikuyu. The male Maasai were the healthiest. The female Maasai were the second healthiest. And way down, distant third were the Akikuyu women, who had a more diverse plant-based diet. And the dead last were the Akikuyu men, who ate mostly grains. I've seen, liars on the internet pushing a vegan diet that completely lied about that study and said that the Akikuyu women were the most healthy out of all four. Complete and utter bullshit. They were better than the men, the Akikuyu men, but they were worse than both the males and females of the Maasai. What about the Maasai mTOR? What about the Maasai TMAO? What about the Maasai, calcium? And they drink a lot of milk. But where do they get that milk from? They get that from an animal. Well, how much calcium is in grass? How much calcium is in meat? I mean, is that enough for bones? Well, I don't know. Why don't you ask a lion? They have bones, and they drink their mother's milk, and so they get a lot of calcium there. Okay, yeah, well, I guess they're drinking milk. Where did the mom get the calcium to make the milk? She's just eating meat. She's not drinking someone else's milk. She's not drinking her mom's milk. It's just like this, worm Ouroboros, where you're just drinking milk, and we just drink each other's milk and pass along the calcium to make each other's milk. That's not happening, right? So they're getting the calcium from the meat that they're eating. So you're dumb, So obviously there's enough calcium in that meat, right? Or else they wouldn't have any milk, or they wouldn't have any milk. They wouldn't have any calcium in their milk, and they wouldn't have any calcium for their bones either, because baby cats are all mammals. They drink their mother's milk and then they get weaned onto their mother's diet when they're very small, when they're very young, and then they eat that diet for the rest of their life. When lions are weaned onto, and humans are weaned onto meat, they're still very small. And so the majority of their bone growth and bone mineralization happens after weaning, happens after they get off their mother's milk. So it's not the milk that's doing it. And again, the calcium from the milk has to come from somewhere, right? So, you know, the thing is that, you know, you can say all this stuff and you can say, oh, well, there's not enough calcium in there. Well, okay. Where the hell does it come from? The thing is that when you're not eating it with plants, you're not getting these anti-nutrients that are blocking out the absorption of calcium. You're not getting it with oxalates that goes into your bloodstream and strips out the calcium. You need way more calcium, you know, in those circumstances, just to get anything than you would otherwise. Also, what about bone mineralization? You have Pottinger's cats. They fed raw meat and cooked meat. The cooked meat ones got sickly, got small. The next generation were smaller, more sickly, and had less bone mineral density and bone mineralization. And it was like from 14% to 7%. And then the third generation was down to 3%, right? There's the exact same amount of calcium in cooked meat as raw meat, right? So it's not about the amount of calcium. There's enough calcium there, obviously, because the raw meat cats had bones and made bones in their kittens. And those kittens grew up to be adults with bones. The calcium was fine. It was something else that was lacking in the cooked meat that made it impossible for them to function normally in a physiological manner. So they weren't able to mineralize their bones properly, to make proper collagen, because, you know, they didn't have taurine and other sorts of amino acids that were getting cooked out that they require. So that's what's going on. So, you know, you're looking at these things, you're looking at a mixed diet, and we're looking at these RDAs that were made up by some asshole named Ansel Keys, who I don't trust a damn thing that guy's ever done, because he's just a paid shill, a sellout, and probably a spawn from Satan sent to this earth to destroy humanity. And he came up with these damn things, but he came up with them at a time when everyone was eating a mixed diet. And so maybe that's correct for people on a mixed diet, but that's not necessarily correct for anybody else, because you don't need 10 milligrams of vitamin C a day to stave off scurvy on a carnivore diet. You just don't, you know, because you don't need vitamin C in the first place to make collagen. Otherwise, I'd be dead right now. My vitamin C, when I checked it, was trace, right? So look at that. You don't need that for scurvy, right? So it's nonsense. And so these RDAs, they only matter in the context of a mixed diet. So they're saying, well, there's not enough calcium here, because, well, we know. Well, no, we don't, because you haven't checked the RDAs and the requirements for people that don't eat shit and don't eat plants that have anti-nutrients and block out the absorption of calcium and strip out the calcium from your body. They gave people spinach back in the 1950s. Spinach has a lot of calcium. It's not bioavailable. And they come with oxalates. So in fact, they gave them spinach because of all the calcium, and people's calciums went down as a result of that, right? Because none of the calcium was available to them. It's not bioavailable. It's all locked up in bonds that we couldn't access, right? And couldn't break down. And then the oxalates would get in the blood and strip out the calcium. So if you're eating this crap, you know, then you're going to damage your body in general, but you're also going to damage your body's ability to maximize its nutrient profile in the food that is bioavailable. So, and again, you know, it doesn't matter what any study says. It doesn't matter what any, you know, really smart guy. I have a lot of respect for Dr. Lustig. He's a very smart man, but it doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And the observed phenomena is that when people exclusively eat meat, they don't get heart disease. There was no heart disease to speak of, certainly not rampant deaths from heart attacks before the 20th century in America or Europe. It just didn't exist in any real numbers. There was a couple in Europe. In America, the first diagnosed death from heart attack on autopsy was in 1912. It didn't exist before then, right? They didn't see any of these things. Maybe they happened, but they were doing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of autopsies. Like each doctor would be doing hundreds of these things, and they just never saw these things. And it was like, hold on a second, that's bullshit. You'd see that. You know, it's not a subtle thing. Someone dies from a heart attack, it means they have a blockage that kills an area of the heart, and that muscle ruptures and has a massive blowout bleed, and that stops the heart, funny enough. Or they survive that, it doesn't rupture, and it scars down. You have this whole side of the heart wall just scarred out and thinned out, and then it might rupture, or it might form an aneurysm out here. These are very not subtle signs, right? So you would notice that, and yet we weren't seeing any of that stuff on autopsy, certainly not to any great degree. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, 20 years later, it's the #1 killer in America. That's funny. That's odd. We don't see any of these things, and now they're the only things we're seeing. It's complete bullshit. So we were eating plenty of meat before that. The Native Americans, the Plains Indians, these guys were living to be 110, 120, sometimes 130 plus years. Where were their heart attacks when they were just eating bison? What about the Inuit when they're just eating, seals and everything like that? You don't get these things. Anthropologists call this the diseases of civilization. And you get these populations. They have they get injuries, accidents, infectious diseases. And it's only when they sort of go into society and cities they start getting the diseases of civilization, and the diseases that you see in developed countries. And why is that? These people are living plenty old, but they're just not developing these diseases. And I saw this one idiot on, he's a doctor and he's an idiot. Doctors are people and some people are idiots. That's all there is to it. This guy was on TikTok. Can't remember his name. Maybe someone remembers his name in the chats or something like that. Maybe they saw it. But this guy, he looks up at something that Paul Saladino said about, there weren't really heart attacks in the 1800s, and we were eating far more meat. And he just goes like, oh, well, that's ridiculous. People just weren't living long enough in the 1800s to develop these sorts of diseases. That guy's a moron. He's just pushing a really shitty ideology and trying to profit off of it. And he's a bariatric surgeon, by the way. So he's a weight loss surgeon. So it's in his best interest to have really bad advice on weight loss, right? Because if his advice was so damn good, he wouldn't need to operate on anybody. But he does, because he's a hack, and he's just too stupid to even just look up the numbers. I mean, it's really easy. I mean, it's just like just Google's your friend. You just look this up. I've got the statistics on my phone. They've got statistics going back to 1850 through the 2010s, showing average life expectancy from birth. And so it's just like, yeah, sure. Average life expectancy from birth in 1850 was only 38. Does that mean that people were dying in their 30s, that they were just dying of old age in their 30s? Well, that'd be funny, because the minimum required age to run for president of the United States was 35. And that rule was they came up with that rule in the 1700s, right? So that's pretty odd. People are just dropping dead of old age, or just getting killed by things. Everyone was just dying in their 30s. So they just weren't living long enough to develop heart disease. And people do die of heart attacks in their 30s, right? But if the minimum age was 35, obviously that wasn't the geriatric population, was it? Right? That was a minimum age. Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia. It's Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. Ben Franklin was like 64 at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, right? I mean, I don't know if people actually think anymore. They certainly don't look shit up. It's really easy. They can just check. Well, people were dying there, but wait, were they? Do I know that? So people speak so authoritatively. And some of these things, they have no business doing it. Some things that's the thing that people, Thomas Sowell writes a lot about this, about intellectuals, because they're really good at their area, and they get so used to being an authority figure and just like, well, think this, and I spent 20 years, 30 years in my field. I know what I'm talking about. And they just know what they're talking about so much that other things that they haven't spent 20, 30 years looking into, they just be like, if they just have this preconceived notion, they're like, oh yeah, people died in their 30s back then. Yeah, authoritatively. Well, did you look it up? Is that from your years of research and clinical experience that you're coming at this? No, you just pulled it out of your ass, and it fits your narrative. And so, but you're speaking authoritatively because you're so used to speaking in that manner for so long. So it's complete and utter garbage. So no, people were not dying in their 30s. They were certainly living long enough. Look up every founding father. John Adams was 91 when he died, and he was born in the mid 1700s, right? Jefferson was like 82. All these other guys were in their 80s and 90s, unless they were killed by something. Like George Washington died, in his late 60s or 70s. But he got sick. He got pneumonia, and they just kept like doing bloodletting and cupping and all these sort of horrible things. They basically killed him. They just sort of just exsanguinated him, the poor bastard. He probably would have just been fine. We just let the poor man rest. But he ended up passing away as a result of these very well-meaning people, most likely. Who knows? But either way, he didn't die of old age, and he was plenty old enough to get heart disease, and yet didn't get heart disease, and he smoked and he drank. 4 out of 5 men smoked in the 1800s. Where was that? Where was that with heart disease? Why isn't I mean, that should be a high risk, and yet people weren't dying from this stuff. You see it on autopsy. You can see some plaques. They saw some plaques going back hundreds of years. Yeah, but no heart attacks. They're just like, what's that? And they recognize it as pathological. They're like, that's not supposed to be there. That's normally not there. That's wrong. That's different. I wonder why that is. So we documented that. We did see this stuff, but it never hit the prevalence that it did, or got bad enough to like actually stop people's, stop people's circulation and cause heart attacks or strokes until the 20th century. And it's not because we were living longer. So if you look at those statistics, 38 from birth, but infant mortality rate was very high. And so that's an average, because a lot of kids are dying in infancy. The adults have to live a lot longer than that to pull that average up from 0, right? So, that's a big difference. And so the people taking those statistics were a lot more intelligent than that idiot TikTok doctor, who's like, he's like this white-haired guy. I mean, he's a grown-ass man. He should be some grandfather, presumably. He should know better than to just talk out of his ass and just make shit up that he hasn't looked up. So the people making the statistics, much smarter than that guy who doesn't know how to think, and probably wasn't taught how to think. In life expectancy from birth was 38, but if you lived to be 10 years old, it was 56. Big difference, right? So you made it to 10 years old, you make it to 56. You made it to 20, you'd live longer. And so if you made it to adulthood, you made it out of those early years where you can get killed by something or die in a war or a famine or something like that. The majority of people were actually living similar ages to what they are now. And that's what the statistics showed. And that's the official statistics. So they went decade by decade of year, and decade by decade of life. It's a whole big chart. And so in 1870, if you lived to be 50, you were going to live this long on average. Again, these are averages. And they had that go up all the way to the 80s. So in 1850, they tracked this out. If you made it to 80, on average, you make it to 86. Now it's 88, right? Not much difference. But the simple fact that they kept records and statistics on people getting to their 8th decade means that there were enough people getting their 8th decade that it was worth taking statistics on, right? So, I mean, use your head. I mean, you just look up famous people from that era and how long they lived. I mean, how old was Mark Twain when he died? My great-grandfather was born in 1875. He died in 1975 at home, fully compos mentis. He was 100 years old, born in 1875, right? And where was his death at 30? I mean, like, he should have been, I guess, dead at the turn of the century. you know, according to this guy, this genius. I mean, how many people you see in these pictures, they're old men in the 1800s, in the 1700s. I mean, Socrates was in his 70s and they had to kill him, right? And there's no accounts in Plato. Oh my God, he's just the oldest man on earth. I was like, no one just could imagine that anyone would live that long. So, you know, these are very, very, very short-sighted views. And I would say that the Mercola saying that calcium deficient is a short-sighted view as well, because it's not. Clearly, the observed fact is no, it is not. You see carnivores eating meat, not chewing up bones, getting calcium. Where did the calcium from the bones come from? You know, and of the animals that they're eating. And then, you know, making, you know, calcium in milk and all these sorts of things, and just being so reductionist that you say, well, meat has choline. Choline will drive TMAO. TMAO will drive heart disease, and high protein will drive mTOR. Will it though? And will it do all of those things? The evidence is strongly in the negative. It does not do any of that crap. And yes, I would bet my life on it, and I am. So thank you very much. Oh, and it drives cancer. What are they on about? Yeah, they're smoking crack. That's all there is to it. Yeah. I actually really like Dr. Lustig. I don't know why he's arguing that, but you know, the whole mTOR thing, I went into this with Professor Bart Kay, who you know, we sort of went into that. The whole idea with mTOR is that you eat protein, it gets into your large intestine, and there's certain bacteria there that could work on that protein that may secrete mTOR, and that could be absorbed, and that may cause a problem. A lot of ifs, ands, coulds, mays, or buts. And because the but there is, if you don't eat meat with plants and fiber and anti-nutrients and protease inhibitors, protein's not getting to your colon in the first place. You're absorbing it, right? And so, you know, it's not going to get down there. So even if you had those bacteria, which you may or may not, because you're eating something different, so you may not actually cultivate that bacteria, right? So even if you had that bacteria there, wouldn't matter because the protein's not getting there anyway. So it's a moot point. And I think people just really don't understand that. But if you're eating meat in a mixed diet and you have all this other crap in it that's delaying the absorption, it's going to get there. Yeah, maybe. And does that do something in your body that's negative? Maybe, but maybe not. There's literally zero hard evidence of that. It's all conjecture and supposition. And again, it's a moot point because protein's not going to get there in the first place, because you're not eating it with a whole bunch of other stuff that's going to delay the absorption. Mercola, never really a fan of Mercola. I sort of half watched some of his things early on, really wasn't impressed, and just sort of got bored with him pretty quickly. He's pretty flighty, but he just goes where the wind blows him. So he's all pushing, oh, keto, keto, keto. And then one guy says one thing about Ray Peat, and he's just like, oh my God, keto's so bad, you're all going to die. Like, okay, you know, but you know, and then just saying things, oh, it's deficient in calcium, and yet it isn't. So, you know, in real practical terms, it isn't. So there are people doing carnivore right now that have carnivore babies. There's the Inuit who exist as a species generationally, and their kids eat a bunch of meat. They make milk from the calcium they get in meat, and the kids eat meat and they build more bones. And so it just does not fit the observed facts. And it doesn't matter what your theory is. It doesn't matter who you are. If it doesn't fit the observed facts, it's a dumb theory. I mean, it's just it. It's not even like the, you know, if it doesn't meet with experiment, it's wrong. If you have a theory and you look out in the world and you see it goes completely counter to that theory, it's a dumb theory. You need to throw it away, or you need to think about it and go like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. I didn't think about that. But if it's in your face going like, well, then how do lions make milk? And you try to make excuses for this or whatever, you know, it's just like, okay, well, how did the Inuit make milk? You know, if you don't say like, okay, yeah, good point. I guess it's not what we thought it is. I guess the RDAs aren't really what we should judge this by. If you can't do that, you know, it's a dumb theory. And if you've looked at all that, but no, but the RDA said it, you know, you're being kind of stupid at that point. And it helped, but it wasn't until she just went full on strict, that's when all these things went away. And her restless leg syndrome went away. Her psoriasis went away. She has sort of psoriasis in sort of the back of her head and her hair, and her period pain went away. So she,